The wandering echo drifted through the debris field like a scavenger picking through bones, her hull plates catching the distant starlight in patches where Marcus hadn't bothered with paint in the last 3 years. Marcus Chen sat in the pilot's chair, feet propped on a console that beeped intermittently in what he'd come to recognize as Grit's electronic equivalent of a disapproving sigh. "You know," Marcus said, adjusting the scanner sweep with his toe, "most AIs develop charming personalities, helpful subroutines, maybe a pleasant voice modulation. You went straight for passive-aggressive maintenance warnings. The port stabilizer is operating at 62% efficiency," Grit announced through the cockpit speakers. "This represents a 17% decline since you ignored my last 8 recommendations." "I heard you the first 8 times. I also heard my credit balance, which said absolutely not." Marcus leaned forward, squinting at the scanner display. The debris field stretched for thousands of kilometers, a graveyard of what had been a major naval engagement. Twisted metal hulls tumbled slowly through the void, frozen corpses still strapped into their stations, the whole scene rotating in a grotesque ballet that would have been beautiful if it wasn't so horrifying. "Besides, we're about to strike it rich. I can feel it. Your feelings have a documented success rate of 4%. That's up from 3% last month. We're trending positive." Marcus guided the Echo toward a particularly large piece of wreckage, what looked like the aft section of a dreadnought that had been sheared clean through. The ship's name was still visible, rendered in characters he didn't recognize. Military, definitely. The kind of military hardware that meant serious salvage value if he could cut away anything the scrapyards would buy. See, that's at least 40 tons of high-grade alloy. We pull this off, you get your precious stabilizer repair. I calculate a 73% probability that military salvage in an active debris field will result in our immediate death. You say that about everything. Remember the Tellurian merchant ship. You said 90% chance of explosive decompression. There was explosive decompression. You merely survived it. Marcus grinned, running his fingers over the navigation controls. The Echo responded like she always did, with a slight shudder and a grinding noise from somewhere in the engineering section that he'd stopped trying to identify. "Survival counts as success in my book. Now let's see what we can," he stopped, finger hovering over the scanner refinement toggle. A blip, faint, almost lost in the electromagnetic hash from all the dead ships, but there. "Grit, you seeing this?" Anomalous reading. Sector 7 Alpha, analyzing, a pause that felt almost theatrical. Life sign detected. Marcus's feet hit the deck, his casual posture evaporating. Life signs in a debris field that looked weeks old were about as common as honest politicians in the core systems. Where? Escape pod, bearing 270 Mark 15. Distance, 4.3 kilometers. Power reserves critical. Someone's alive out there. Marcus was already plotting an intercept course, his hands moving across the controls with more confidence than he usually felt. How long? Estimates suggest life support failure within 40 minutes. I must advise against rescue operations. Unknown parties in distress frequently result in complications. Complications like what? Someone saying thank you, maybe offering a reward. Marcus pushed the Echo into a hard burn, feeling the artificial gravity compensators struggle to keep up. "I'm already out here risking my neck for scrap metal. Might as well risk it for something with a heartbeat." Your optimism continues to defy statistical probability. The escape pod came into view 5 minutes later, tumbling slowly against the backdrop of the shattered dreadnought. It was small, single occupant, with scoring along the hull that spoke of recent weapons fire. Marcus maneuvered the Echo alongside it, matching rotation, his hands steadier now that he had a clear objective. This was the part he was good at, the technical challenge, the precision flying that kept him fed and his ship operational. "Magnetic grapple deployed," he muttered, watching the targeting reticle line up. "Come on, baby, nice and easy." The grapple clanged against the pod's hull with a sound that resonated through the echo's superstructure. Marcus felt the ship's attitude thrusters fire automatically, compensating for the new mass. He brought the pod into the small cargo airlock, cycling the atmosphere with fingers that had started to shake slightly. He blamed it on adrenaline and low blood sugar, not on the growing realization that he had no idea what he'd find inside. The airlock finished cycling. Marcus stood in front of the pod, staring at the small viewport set into its hatch. Emergency lighting cast everything in red, making it hard to see details. He reached for the manual override, then hesitated. Grit, any biosecurity concerns I should know about? Scanning, no known pathogens detected. Occupant reads as humanoid. Elevated stress indicators. Multiple traumatic injuries. Fantastic. Marcus pulled the override. The hatch hissed open, and he got his first look at his passenger. She lay crumpled against the pod's acceleration couch, and his first thought was that she looked like a piece of art someone had broken. Porcelain-white skin that seemed to gather the red emergency light and reflect it back in a faint luminescence. Raven-black hair matted with blood that had dried in zero gravity, forming strange crystalline patterns. Her flight suit was shredded across the torso, revealing lattices of scars that covered her arms like someone had used her skin as a canvas for a star chart. Marcus reached for her throat, checking for a pulse, and that's when he saw her ears. They swept back from her skull in an elegant curve, longer than human, tapering to delicate points. Definitely not human. Definitely not any species he recognized from the standard databases, and he'd shipped cargo across half the settled systems. Well, he said to no one in particular, this is either the best decision I've ever made or the one that finally kills me. Probability suggests the latter, Grit offered helpfully. Marcus slid his arms under her. She weighed almost nothing, which worried him, and carried her toward the medical bay. It was barely large enough to qualify as a closet, with one acceleration couch retrofitted with diagnostic equipment he'd bought third-hand from a colony clinic. He laid her down carefully, his hands already reaching for the nanite injector, while his mind raced through the limited emergency medical training he'd picked up over the years. Her breathing was shallow, irregular. The diagnostic panel lit up with readings that made his stomach clench. Internal bleeding, possible spinal trauma, burns across 30% of her body surface. She needed a real doctor, a real medical facility, not a salvage pilot with shaking hands and equipment held together with improvised repairs. Grit, can we make it to Outpost 7? AT current velocity, 19 hours. Patient survival probability, 11%. Marcus looked at the woman, at the scars on her arms, at the strange beauty of her alien features. 11%. He'd beaten worse odds, though never with someone else's life on the line. Then I guess we'd better get creative, he said, loading the nanite injector and hoping the universal medical protocols weren't lying about cross-species compatibility. Don't die on me. I just cleaned this medical bay. Her eyes flickered open for just a moment, obsidian black, depthless, fixed on his face with an intensity that made him freeze. Then they closed again, and Marcus was left wondering if he'd imagined the whole thing. Definitely the decision that kills me, he whispered and got to work. Marcus discovered that talking to unconscious alien women was significantly easier than talking to conscious ones, which he supposed said something unflattering about his social skills. 3 days into what he'd privately started calling Operation Don't Let the Pretty Alien Die, he developed a routine that involved checking vitals every 4 hours, applying fresh nanite patches, and rambling about absolutely nothing while she lay motionless on the medical couch. So the thing about salvage work, he said, injecting another dose of synthetic plasma into the IV line he'd rigged, is that it's 90% boredom and 10% trying not to explode. Which sounds terrible when I say it out loud, but honestly it beats working corporate. Did that for 6 months on a mining station. 6 months of filing requisition forms and attending meetings about meetings. He checked the diagnostic panel, noting that her cellular regeneration had jumped another 3% overnight. The nanites were working, even if he had no idea whether they were supposed to work on her particular biology. You know what the worst part was? The small talk, just endless conversations about nothing with people who smiled too much. At least out here when Grit insults me, it's honest. I resent the implication that MY assessments are insults, Grit announced from the medical bay speakers. They are merely accurate observations about your competence levels. See, honest. Marcus adjusted the woman's position slightly, trying to prevent bed sores on someone whose circulatory system he didn't understand. Her skin still had that strange luminescence, though it seemed brighter now, less like a dying ember and more like foxfire. Patience improving, by the way, in case you were wondering. I was not. However, I have completed analysis of her biological markers. They do not match any species in the standard databases. Marcus paused, syringe halfway to the disposal chute. Any species. You've got what, 40,000 registered profiles? 43,612. SHEMATCHES, none of them. CLOSESD approximation is baseline human with significant genetic modifications. The ear structure alone suggests either evolutionary divergence or deliberate alteration. So she's either from some uncontacted colony that's been modifying themselves for generations, or someone made her this way on purpose. Marcus looked at the scars on her arms, at the precision of them. Each one was about 2 centimeters long, arranged in patterns that definitely weren't random. Those are tally marks, aren't they? Analysis suggests ritualistic scarification, purpose unknown. Great. I'm harboring someone who either counts their achievements or their victims on their skin. This is definitely going in my memoir under terrible life choices. He spent the rest of that day trying not to think about what those scars meant, focusing instead on the practical problems of keeping another living being alive in a ship designed for solo operation. The Wandering Echo wasn't built for passengers. She had 1 sleeping quarters, 1 head, 1 small galley that Marcus used mostly to heat ration packs. The observation deck was technically a cargo space with an oversized viewport, but he'd claimed it years ago as his personal retreat when the cockpit started feeling too much like a coffin. On the 4th day, he moved her there. The medical bay was claustrophobic even by his standards, and the woman needed space to heal. He rigged a temporary bed from cargo netting and thermal blankets, positioned it where she could see the stars through the viewport if she ever woke up. It felt important somehow, like whoever she was, she should wake up to something beautiful instead of gray bulkheads and blinking warning lights. You'd probably hate it here, he told her while arranging the blankets. The Echo's not much to look at. Built her myself from salvaged parts over about 5 years. That viewport. Pulled it from a luxury yacht that ran into an asteroid. The artificial gravity generator came from a colony transport. The life support system is held together with sealant patches and prayer. He sat down next to her makeshift bed, watching her face for any sign of awareness. But she flies. That's something. That night, or what passed for night on a ship that measured time in arbitrary cycles, her breathing changed. Marcus jerked awake from where he dozed off in the pilot's chair, ran to the observation deck, and found her eyes open. They were black, not dark brown or deep blue, but actually black, like looking into deep space. They fixed on him with an intensity that made him acutely aware that he was wearing a 3-day-old shirt and probably smelled like recycled air and desperation. Hey, he said, because his brain had apparently decided this was an appropriate greeting for an alien woman who'd nearly died in his cargo hold. You're awake. That's good. That's really good, actually, because I was running out of interesting things to talk about, and Grit's conversation skills are limited to criticism and statistical analysis. She blinked once, twice. Her lips moved and sound came out that was like nothing Marcus had ever heard. It flowed like water, musical and strange, syllables that his translator implant couldn't parse. Right, language barrier, of course. Marcus held up his hands in what he hoped was a universal gesture of non-aggression. I'm Marcus, Marcus. He pointed to himself, then to her, raising his eyebrows in question. She stared at him. Her hand moved slowly to her side, fingers searching for something that wasn't there. A weapon, Marcus realized with a cold spike of adrenaline. She was looking for a weapon. No weapons, he said quickly, still holding his hands up. You're safe here. I found you in an escape pod. You were hurt. I've been trying to help. He mimed the nanite injector, the IV, then pointed to the scars on her arms and shook his head. No more hurt. Safe. Her obsidian eyes tracked his every movement, calculating. Marcus had the sudden, uncomfortable feeling that she was mapping the observation deck, counting the exits, assessing him as a potential threat despite the fact that she could barely move. Elevated heart rate detected, Grit announced helpfully. Hers or yours? Both, probably. Marcus slowly lowered his hands, trying to project calm he didn't feel. Look, I know this is weird. You don't know me, you don't know where you are, and you probably think I'm either going to sell you or space you. But I'm just a salvage pilot who happened to find you, and honestly my criminal ambitions peak at tax evasion. She said something else in that flowing language, her tone shifting to what might have been a question. Food, Marcus mimed eating. Water. He made a drinking gesture that felt ridiculous but was all he had. Do you need anything? Her eyes narrowed slightly, and for a moment Marcus thought she might be trying to smile, or possibly preparing to kill him with her bare hands. With aliens, it was hard to tell. He decided to interpret it as the former and went to the galley, returning with a ration pack and a bulb of water. He opened the pack slowly, demonstrating that it was food, dubious food, food that the manufacturers optimistically called nutritionally complete, and that Marcus called technically edible, but food nonetheless. She took it with hands that trembled slightly, her long fingers wrapping around the package. She ate slowly, methodically, her black eyes never leaving his face. Marcus sat across from her, maintaining what he hoped was a respectful distance, and tried not to think about the fact that he'd just invited a complete unknown into his ship, his home, with absolutely no plan beyond keeping her alive. So, he said into the silence, welcome aboard the Wandering Echo. The bunks are terrible, the food is worse, and the AI has authority issues, but the view's not bad. She looked past him to the viewport, to the vast spread of stars beyond, and something shifted in her expression. For just a moment, the calculation left her eyes, replaced by something that might have been wonder or grief or recognition. Then it was gone, and she was looking at him again with that same unsettling intensity. Marcus smiled because he didn't know what else to do. Yeah, he said quietly, I like the stars too. Teaching galactic common to someone who learned languages the way most people breath turned out to be both easier and more terrifying than Marcus expected. By the end of the first week, she could string together basic sentences. By the end of the second, she was correcting his grammar. No, she said, her accent turning the words into something musical even as she frowned at him. You say the ship is moving, not the ship moves. Present continuous, not simple present. Marcus looked up from the cargo manifest he'd been using as a teaching tool. I'm a salvage pilot, not a linguistics professor. If people understand me, I call it a win. People understand you poorly. She was sitting cross-legged on the cargo hold floor, surrounded by data tablets Marcus had scrounged from storage. Her recovery had been remarkable, where she'd been barely able to stand a week ago. Now, she moved through the ship with a fluid grace that made him think of dancers or predators. Your vocabulary is adequate. Your syntax is chaos. Grit says the same thing about my flight patterns, and I'm still alive. Marcus tossed her another tablet. Try this one. It's a technical manual for the Echo's environmental systems. Lot of specialized vocabulary, should keep you busy. She caught it one-handed without looking, her attention still on the manifest. This word here, salvage. You take things from dead ships. Abandoned ships, Marcus corrected. There's a legal distinction. Abandoned means no crew, no active distress beacon, no claim filed with the salvage authority. I'm not a pirate. The difference is small. The difference is about 15 years in a penal colony, so I'm pretty invested in it. He sat down across from her, noting how her hand still moved toward her hip whenever Grit announced proximity alerts. No weapon had materialized there in 2 weeks, but the gesture never stopped. Speaking of which, you never told me your name. I've been calling you Sierra in my head, but that seems presumptuous. Her black eyes flicked up to meet his. Sierra is acceptable. That's not an answer. It is the answer I am giving. She returned to the manifest, her long fingers tracing lines of text. The scars on her arms caught the cargo hold's overhead lighting, each precise mark standing out against her pale skin. Marcus had stopped trying not to stare at them. Whatever they meant, they were part of her, and pretending not to notice felt more insulting than curiosity. Fair enough. We've all got our secrets. He pulled up a diagram of the Echo's power distribution system on his own tablet. You want to learn common, I won't complain. Makes communication easier when I inevitably do something stupid and need you to understand the emergency protocols. You do stupid things frequently. Grit keeps a running tally. We're at 47 this month. 49, Grit announced from the cargo hold speakers. You forgot the incident with the coolant leak and your attempt to repair it with thermal tape. That worked, didn't it? For 17 minutes, then it exploded. Sierra made a sound that might have been a laugh, though it came out rusty, like she was out of practice. Marcus felt unreasonably proud of himself for causing it. The days developed a rhythm. Marcus would run salvage operations while Sierra studied in the cargo hold, her learning speed frankly unsettling. She absorbed information like a sponge, moving from children's books to technical manuals to what Marcus suspected was his entire digital library. When he returned from cutting apart derelicts, she'd be waiting with questions about galactic politics, trade routes, or the finer points of plasma torch operation. Why do you work alone? She asked one evening while he was eating dinner in the galley. She'd taken to joining him for meals, though she ate sparingly, like someone used to rationing. Partnerships are complicated. Someone always wants a bigger cut, or they get moral qualms about what we're salvaging, or they turn out to be undercover authority agents. Marcus gestured with his fork at the empty chair across from him. This way, I only have to trust myself and Grit, and Grit's literally programmed not to kill me. Debatable, Grit muttered. See, trustworthy. Marcus studied her face, looking for clues in those inscrutable black eyes. What about you? You said you understood being alone, military background. Her hand went to her hip again. Why do you ask this? Because you move like someone with combat training. Because you check exit routes in every room. Because last week when that merchanter came too close, you were calculating firing solutions before I even considered it a threat. He kept his voice casual, non-threatening. I'm not judging. Half the people in the outer reach are running from something. I just like to know what I'm dealing with. Sierra was quiet for a long moment, her fingers drumming against the table in a pattern that seemed almost like code. I was a soldier. The war ended, I left. Which war? Does it matter? Wars are all the same, people die, reasons are forgotten, survivors carry scars. She stood abruptly, the movement so smooth it looked choreographed. I practice now. She'd claimed a corner of the cargo hold for what she called practice, and what Marcus privately thought of as absolutely terrifying displays of combat proficiency. He'd watched her once, seen her move through forms that turned her body into a weapon, each strike precise enough to kill. It had been beautiful and horrible, and he'd left feeling like he'd witnessed something private. Proximity alert, Grit announced, yanking Marcus from his thoughts. 3 vessels, bearing 090. They've changed course to intercept. Marcus was moving before his brain fully processed the words, racing to the cockpit while his heart hammered against his ribs. 3 ships didn't change course by coincidence. 3 ships meant hunters or pirates or authority patrols, none of which were good news for a salvage operator working the edges of legal territory. The tactical display showed 3 signatures, military-grade by their thrust profiles, closing fast. Marcus's hands flew over the controls, plotting escape vectors while Grit ran identification protocols. Transponders identify them as private security, registered to alienwoman Collective. Hellions a mining conglomerate. What are they doing out here? Marcus pushed the Echo into a hard burn, angling toward a nearby asteroid cluster that might provide cover. The ship groaned in protest, and somewhere in engineering something made a sound like a wounded animal, but she responded. Sierra appeared in the cockpit doorway, and Marcus noticed she'd found a knife from somewhere. It was in her hand like it belonged there, like it was an extension of her arm. "How many?" she asked, her comment suddenly flawless, all trace of accent gone. 3, closing fast. Could be they're just territorial, or... The comm system crackled to life, and a voice filled the cockpit. "Unidentified vessel, this is Captain Vross of the Hellion Security Fleet. Cut your engines and prepare to be boarded. You are harboring a fugitive wanted for crimes against the Collective. Surrender her immediately, and you may be spared." Marcus felt ice water dump into his stomach. He looked at Sierra, at the way she held that knife, at the absolute lack of surprise on her face. "What did you do?" he asked quietly. "Survived," she said, and there was something in her voice that hadn't been there before. Something cold and sharp and utterly certain. "They will not take me. They will try to kill us both." "Incoming transmission," Grit announced. "They are demanding response." Marcus stared at the tactical display, at the 3 ships that had cut off his escape routes with practiced efficiency, at Sierra, who stood in his cockpit with a knife in her hand and secrets in her eyes, at the whole impossible situation he'd stumbled into because he couldn't resist checking one escape pod in a debris field. "This is the Wandering Echo," he said into the comm, his voice steadier than he felt. "I'm a registered salvage operator working legal territory. I don't know what you're talking about." "SENSORS detect weapons lock," Grit said. "Multiple targeting solutions active." The first shot hit their aft shields 3 seconds later, and Marcus stopped thinking about anything except keeping them alive. The Wandering Echo screamed through the asteroid cluster like a drunk threading a needle, and Marcus was fairly certain at least 3 different systems were on fire. The tactical display showed all 3 Hellion ships in pursuit, their weapons carving glowing lines through space where the Echo had been milliseconds before. "This would be a great time for you to tell me exactly what you did to make corporate security this angry," Marcus said, wrenching the ship into a hard lateral turn that made his teeth rattle. An asteroid the size of a small moon drifted past the viewport close enough that he could see the ice crystals on its surface. Sierra braced herself against the cockpit bulkhead, still holding that knife. "I refused an order. My commander disagreed with my refusal, violently." "What kind of order?" "The kind that would have killed 3,000 civilians." She said it flatly, without emotion, like she was reading a weather report. "Hellion wanted mineral rights on a contested moon. The colony there had legal claim. My unit was ordered to remove them." Marcus dodged another volley of weapons fire, the Echo's shields flickering dangerously. "Remove them how?" "Permanently." "And you said no." "I said no. Then I said no with my ship's weapon systems pointed at the troop transports." For the first time since the hunters appeared, something like feeling crept into her voice. 12 ships turned against me. I destroyed 4 before they crippled my vessel. I took an escape pod. I drifted for 6 days before you found me." "Shield integrity AT 42%, Grit announced. "Recommendation: surrender or pray." "I'm open to a third option," Marcus muttered, his fingers dancing across the navigation controls. The asteroid cluster was dense here, a maze of rock and ice that would shred any ship moving too fast. It would also shred the Echo if he miscalculated by even a meter. Grit, what have we got for countermeasures? 3. Chaff PODS. 2. Electronic warfare DRONES. 1. Mining charge you forgot about from the salvage operation in Sector 12. The mining charge is perfect, arm it. It is designed to crack asteroids, not engage military VESSELS. Then it's time for a career change. Marcus watched the tactical display, timing his move. The lead Hellion ship was closing fast, too fast, overconfident in their superior firepower. Sira, I need you to manually deploy the charge when I give the word. Cargo Bay Access Panel 3, red lever, you can't miss it. But she was gone before he finished speaking, moving through the ship with that unsettling grace. Marcus heard her footsteps in the cargo hold, heard the access panel wrench open. Ready, her voice came through the ship's internal comm. Marcus pulled the Echo into a spiral around a massive asteroid, putting it between them and the hunters. The lead ship followed, weapon ports glowing. They fired, and Marcus felt the shot hammer into the rear shields hard enough to throw him against his restraints. Shield integrity, AT 19%. Now Sira. The mining charge ejected from the cargo bay. A small sphere studded with shaped charges designed to split rock along fault lines. It drifted for exactly 2 seconds before the lead Hellion ship, moving at combat speed, ran directly into it. The explosion lit up the asteroid field like a small sun. Marcus didn't wait to see the results, already vectoring away while debris from the destroyed ship pinged off the Echo's hull. One down, he said, allowing himself a moment of savage satisfaction. Grit, status on the other 2. Reforming pursuit pattern, they are more cautious now. Good, cautious means slow. Marcus angled toward a dense section of the cluster, somewhere the Echo's smaller size and his intimate knowledge of salvage piloting might give them an edge. How's our fuel? Sufficient for 17 more minutes of combat maneuvering. After that, we drift. Sira returned to the cockpit, slightly out of breath. That was effective. I have my moments. Another shot carved past them, close enough that Marcus saw the superheated plasma through the viewport. Though I'm open to suggestions if you've got tactical experience that doesn't involve massive ship-to-ship battles. My experience is exactly massive ship-to-ship battles. Of course it is. Marcus threw the Echo into a corkscrew dive between 2 asteroids, the gap so narrow that warning alarms screamed about proximity hazards. Because my life wasn't complicated enough. The second Hellion ship appeared above them, having apparently decided to try the direct approach. It fired, and this time the shot caught them clean on the port side. The Echo shuddered, something in the superstructure making a sound like rending metal, and every console in the cockpit went dark for 3 horrible seconds before emergency power kicked in. Shield failure. Hull breach deck 2, section 4, sealing bulkheads. That's my quarters, Marcus said absently, fighting to keep the ship level. There goes my collection of vintage Earth music and that plant I was trying not to kill. But you kept a plant, Sira asked. It was doing really well too, 3 months without dying, personal record. The third ship came at them from below, and Marcus realized with cold certainty that they'd been hurted. The hunters had learned from their companion's destruction, adapted their tactics, and now had the Echo in a kill box with no clever escape routes left. Multiple weapons lock detected, Grit said. Probability of survival, 4%. Marcus looked at Sira, at her black eyes and the scars on her arms and the absolutely calm expression on her face. You know how to operate Echo's weapon systems. I can learn quickly. That's what worries me. He keyed the internal comm to the engineering section. Gunnery station is behind the cockpit, down the access ladder. Controls are standard military interface. Just point at the bad guys and try not to hit any asteroids. She moved immediately, her footsteps already fading down the corridor before he finished speaking. Marcus heard the gunnery station power up, felt the ship's remaining energy reserves redirect to the weapons array. "This is probably where I die," he told Grit conversationally, lining up what he hoped was a suicidal-looking charge at the nearest Hellion ship. "I want it noted that I died trying something incredibly stupid that had a non-zero chance of working." Noted. Also noted. Your passenger is accessing weapons protocols reserved for military-grade AI integration. She said she learned fast. The Echo's forward plasma cannons opened fire, and Marcus immediately understood why Grit sounded concerned. Sierra wasn't just shooting, she was conducting a symphony of destruction. Each shot found its mark with surgical precision, targeting the second Hellion ship's sensors, its maneuvering thrusters, its communication array. Not killing shots but crippling ones, forcing the hunter to break off or risk floating dead in space. "Where did you learn to shoot like that?" Marcus asked, but she didn't answer, already redirecting fire to the third ship. That's when the second ship, damaged and desperate, fired everything it had. The shot caught them amidships, and this time there was no emergency power, no graceful recovery. The Echo tumbled, consoles exploding in showers of sparks, the artificial gravity cutting out completely. Marcus felt himself lift from the pilot's chair, his restraints the only thing keeping him from becoming a projectile. Through the chaos, he heard Sierra's voice over the calm, still focused. "Marcus, I need you to route all remaining power to weapons, everything. That includes life support. Do it." He didn't have time to argue, didn't have time to think about the implications. His hands moved across the emergency override panel, pulling power from every non-essential system. The lights died. The artificial gravity gave its last gasp. The temperature regulation went offline, and immediately the cockpit started getting colder. But the weapons came alive. Sierra fired once, twice, 3 times in rapid succession. The third Hellion ship exploded in a bloom of light that painted the asteroid field in shades of orange and white. The second ship, already crippled, tried to run, and managed maybe 300 meters before its damaged systems gave out entirely. Then there was silence, broken only by the Echo's emergency klaxons and the sound of Marcus's own breathing in the suddenly frigid air. "Life support offline," Grit said, sounding almost apologetic. "Oxygen reserves. 47 minutes. Sierra," Marcus called into the comm. "You alive?" "Yes." A pause. "Your ship is not." "Story of my life." Marcus pulled himself hand over hand to the engineering section, his breath already fogging in the cold. "Grit, can we get anything back online?" "Negative. Primary power coupling is destroyed. Backup generators are offline. We are effectively dead in space." Marcus found Sierra floating in the gunnery station, her black eyes reflecting the emergency lights like mirrors. She looked at him, and for the first time since she'd woken up in his medical bay, he saw something in her expression that might have been regret. "I am sorry," she said quietly. "This is my fault." "Yeah," Marcus agreed, pulling himself closer. "But you saved our lives, so I'm calling it even. Now we just have to figure out how to survive the next 47 minutes before we suffocate." 47 minutes turned out to be optimistic. Marcus spent the first 10 floating through the Echo's dead corridors with Sierra, assessing damage by emergency light while their breath turned to frost in the air. The primary power coupling wasn't just destroyed, it had melted into slag. The backup generators had cracked housings. Even the solar panels had taken shrapnel damage from the weapon's fire. "We could try rerouting power from my escape pod," Sierra offered, her voice muffled by the makeshift breathing mask Marcus had fashioned from cargo netting and an emergency oxygen canister. "Your pod's been stripped for parts. I used the power cell to keep you alive 2 weeks ago." Marcus kicked off a bulkhead, drifting toward the engineering section. "Grit, give me good news." "I have none. However, I can offer you a philosophical observation about the inevitability of entropy." "Pass." Marcus pulled himself into the engine compartment, staring at the wreckage of systems he'd maintained for 5 years. The Echo had been his home, his livelihood, his escape from a universe that demanded conformity and compliance. Seeing her gutted felt like losing a piece of himself. Sierra floated beside him, her long fingers tracing the damaged coupling. This configuration is inefficient. Who designed it? I did, from salvaged parts across 6 different ship classes. That explains much. She pulled herself closer, examining the melted components. If we had a plasma torch, we could potentially cannibalize the weapons array. The targeting computer has a functional power cell. Weapons are offline. We used everything to take out those last 2 ships. Not everything. She pushed off toward the gunnery station, moving through zero gravity like she'd been born to it. Marcus followed, his oxygen canister running low enough that he was starting to feel lightheaded. The gunnery station was a mess of blown circuits and shattered displays, but Sierra ignored all of it, focusing on a small panel near the floor. She pried it open with her knife, revealing a compact power cell that was somehow still showing green status lights. "Emergency reserve," she said. "Military specification. Your ship must have been built from a decommissioned warship's components." "Might have been. I don't ask too many questions when I'm buying parts from outer-reach traders." Marcus stared at the power cell, doing calculations in his head. "That's maybe enough to run life support for 6 hours. Not enough to get us anywhere useful. But enough to repair the primary coupling if we work fast. And if we fail, we've wasted our oxygen doing manual labor in a dead ship." Marcus looked at her, at the determination in those black eyes, and felt something shift in his chest. "You know what? I didn't become a salvage pilot because I make good decisions. Grit, walk us through emergency coupling replacement." What followed was 2 hours of the most technically demanding work Marcus had ever attempted, made infinitely worse by zero gravity, dying oxygen, and the fact that neither of them were actually engineers. Grit provided instructions in its usual encouraging manner, which meant a constant stream of probability calculations that all hovered around 12% success rate. "You know," Marcus said, his hands shaking from cold and oxygen deprivation as he aligned a connector that had never been designed to fit the housing he was shoving it into. "When I found you in that escape pod, I thought maybe you'd be grateful. Maybe offer a reward. Maybe just say thanks and disappear into whatever life you left behind." Sierra held the plasma torch steady, fusing components that had no business being fused. "Would you have preferred that?" "That would have been simpler." He tightened a connection, felt it seat properly, allowed himself a moment of hope. "Instead, I got hunted by corporate security, had my ship destroyed, and I'm probably going to die in the next 20 minutes from oxygen deprivation." "You regret finding me." "I didn't say that." Marcus paused, meeting her eyes across the cramped engine compartment. "I've spent 5 years out here alone because people are complicated and messy, and they inevitably betray you, or leave, or turn out to be authority informants. It was simpler to just have Grit and the Echo, and no one who could disappoint me. And now I'm realizing that simple is just another word for lonely." He secured the final connection, his vision starting to tunnel at the edges. "Grit, moment of truth. Will this work? Probability of success, 19%. However, your execution has been surprisingly competent. High praise from you." Marcus reached for the activation switch, his fingers numb. "Sierra, if this doesn't work." "It will work," she said with absolute certainty, and he wanted to believe her. He threw the switch. For 3 seconds, nothing happened. Then the coupling hummed to life, power flowing through jury-rigged connections that had no right to function. The emergency lights brightened. The life support system coughed, wheezed, and began cycling air. The temperature regulation kicked in with a grinding sound that suggested it was just as surprised to be working as Marcus was. "Life support restored," Grit announced. "Main power AT 17%. Propulsion SYSTEMS online. We are no longer drifting toward our inevitable demise." Marcus pulled off his breathing mask, sucking in air that tasted like recycled metal and victory. "We're alive. We are alive," Sierra agreed, and she was smiling, actually smiling. Her face transformed into something that made Marcus's oxygen-deprived brain forget how to form words. They limped out of the asteroid field on minimal power, the Echo barely responsive but flying. Marcus plotted a course away from Hellion space, away from the registered trade routes, toward the unmapped territories that existed in the gaps between corporate claims and government oversight. "Where are we going?" Sierra asked from the co-pilot chair he'd never had occasion to use before. "Somewhere they won't find us, the far drift maybe, or the scattered reaches. Places where people don't ask questions and the authority doesn't waste resources on enforcement." He glanced at her. "Unless you've got somewhere else to be." "I have nowhere. I am a traitor to Hellion, a deserter to any military who might hire me, and apparently worth enough to send 3 hunter ships." She traced one of the scars on her arm absently. These marks were for victories in the Veil Wars. Each one a battle won, an objective secured, an enemy defeated. "I thought they meant something." "They mean you survived. They mean I killed." She said it quietly, without inflection. 347 marks. 347 times I followed orders without question. Until the order that asked me to murder civilians for mineral rights. Marcus was quiet for a moment, watching the stars drift past the viewport. "My father wanted me to be a corporate pilot. Steady job, good benefits, retirement plan. I tried it for 6 months and felt like I was suffocating. So I stole a ship, borrowed without permission, and became a salvage operator. My family hasn't spoken to me in 8 years. Do you regret it?" "Every day, and never." He adjusted their course slightly, avoiding a debris field that Grit flagged as potentially unstable. "The point is, we all make choices that cut us off from who we were. The question is whether we can live with who we become." Sierra looked at him, really looked at him, and something passed between them that felt like understanding. "You make terrible jokes when you are uncomfortable. It's a defense mechanism. Grit says it undermines my authority." "You have no authority. Your ship barely functions, and you make repairs with salvaged parts and optimism. And yet we're alive, so maybe optimism counts for something." Marcus grinned at her, feeling lighter than he had in years despite the destroyed ship and the bounties that were probably being placed on both their heads. "Besides, you're one to talk. You're a wanted war criminal who's been living on my ship for 3 weeks eating my rations and critiquing my grammar. Your grammar is terrible. My grammar keeps me fed and flying. That's all I need." Grit interrupted what was probably about to become an argument about linguistic standards. "SCNSORS detects 16 vessels in pursuit. Correction, 18 vessels. They are converging from multiple vectors." Marcus felt ice water dump through his veins. 18. That's not corporate security, that's a fleet. Transponder analysis suggests a coalition. HELION collective, VERIDIAN authority, and several unregistered vessels. Estimated time to intercept, 41 minutes. "They want you that badly?" Marcus asked Sierra. "They want me silent. I know too much about too many operations that violated treaty law." She stood, that knife appearing in her hand again. "You should jettison me in an escape pod. They will pursue me and you can escape." "Yeah, that's not happening. Marcus, you will die. I'm a salvage pilot with a broken ship, no weapons, and a galaxy full of people who want me dead for harboring you. My prospects aren't great even if I throw you out an airlock." He plotted an intercept course for the nearest unmapped sector, somewhere the charts marked as gravitational anomalies, avoid. "Besides, I'm terrible at being alone. Turns out I needed someone to criticize my grammar and explain how I'm doing everything wrong. This is not a joke." "I know." Marcus looked at her, at the woman who'd been a stranger 3 weeks ago and was now somehow essential. "But I'm done running from complicated. Grit, give me everything we've got. If we're going down flying." "Acknowledged. For the record, your decision-making has improved marginally since meeting Sira. High praise. The Echo limped toward the unmapped territories with 18 ships in pursuit, her systems held together with improvised repairs and stubborn refusal to die. Marcus Chen, Salvage pilot and terrible decision-maker, sat in his worn chair with an alien war criminal in his co-pilot seat, and thought that maybe, finally, he'd found something worth not running from. So, he said as the warning lights began to flash, any other classified information I should know about, secret weapons, hidden bases, maybe a wealthy benefactor who'd pay good money for your safe return. Sira almost smiled. No, only scars and enemies. Then I guess we match. Marcus pushed the Echo to full burn, such as it was. Welcome aboard, Sira. Let's see how far